Years went by and no improvement in my eating ever came about. Since doctors had always said I'd grow out of it, I sat around and waited for my habits to change on their own. Needless to say, they did not. And when I was about 20, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't figure out why I was still eating like a child, and I wanted it to end. I wanted to be normal. I was tired of having so many dietary restrictions and feeling like a burden to my friends and family whenever we would go out to dinner. I decided just to sit down and eat a salad already. Salads look good to me, and if I had to choose a new food to introduce into my palate, it would be a salad. That was a bad idea. I sat down at a table with the salad in hand and was ready to start a new life as a normal eater. I picked up the fork and I moved it towards my mouth, and then my stomach started to violently react. I hadn't even taken a bite yet. I had just moved the fork towards me, and already my stomach started to do flip-flops. So I put the fork back down and I took a deep breath. I couldn't understand what the problem was. I wanted to eat this. I wanted to eat this salad. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't being forced to do anything. This was a choice. The salad looked good and I was ready to eat it. So I made another attempt because surely I was capable of at least chewing it up and swallowing it. There was nothing wrong with me as far as I could tell that would prohibit me from chewing something. So I made a second attempt. I picked up the fork and I shoved it into my mouth before my stomach could protest. And just as I was ready to begin chewing, it happened. Everything I had eaten that day up to that point had come rushing up, and I took off for the bathroom so that I could throw up. My mind didn't even have time to connect with my body and chew the salad. My stomach was ready to reject it, whether it liked it or not. I was completely surprised by this reaction and had to stop and process it all. And what was wrong with me? Why wasn't I even able to chew this, especially when I wanted to? After that, I knew I was trying to fight something that was outside of my ability to do so. I didn't know what was wrong, and doctors didn't seem to know either. It had occurred to me that maybe it was something inside my brain that was causing me to reject the food, so I decided to start seeing a psychologist. That arrangement ended after 2 visits. The psychologist told me that the only thing we needed to do was lessen my anxiety around food. She wanted to put me on Prozac so that when I felt confident enough to try something new, I could. I knew that wouldn't work and that the psychologist didn't have the answer to my picky eating either, so I left. After the meeting with the psychologist fell through, I decided to halt my attempts at curing my picky eating for a while and just try to live the best life I could. I felt very alone, and I didn't understand why doctors didn't have the answer, why they'd never heard of this, and I started to adopt the belief that I was doing this to myself somehow. It was a lonely feeling, and I thought of myself as a second-class citizen. In 2009, everything changed. I was 28 years old. A dear friend of mine encouraged me to research online and see if I could discover why I was this way and what was wrong with me. I typed the words adult picky eating into a Google search, and to my surprise, a website called pickyeatingadults.com surfaced. I began to comb through the website, and that's when I discovered that I was, in fact, not alone. After that, everything changed. Now I know that this is not all in my head, and that I didn't do something to myself all those years ago to make me be this way. And I know that many of you experienced the same when you discovered that you were not alone. So if this condition is beyond our control, then what is it exactly that's causing us to be this way? Currently, no one knows for sure. There has been a hot discussion in the news lately that has labeled picky eating as a mental illness, and that it will be listed in the upcoming DSM-5. The name being thrown around for our picky eating is Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, and they are defining it as an eating or feeding disturbance that includes avoiding foods of a particular taste, texture, and or color. When considering the definition as is, I would agree that I would consider myself a sufferer of avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. What doesn't sit well with me is the fact that I label myself as having this disorder, then I must label myself as someone with a mental illness. And I'm not so sure that it's mental. Obviously, someone doesn't escape living life with an unknown disorder and not suffer some mental repercussions. And I'm not saying that things that pertaining to my disorder cannot be fixed if I try hard enough and work at it. But I also feel that this didn't start with a mental abnormality. I believe it started with a physical dysfunction of my senses. I don't think my senses view the world in the same way that everyone else's does, a la sensory processing disorder. Food doesn't sit in my mouth the same way it does in someone else's. I recall trying to eat an orange once. I love orange juice, and I thought maybe I could handle an orange. I placed the orange in my mouth and suddenly I had no idea of how to chew it. It was almost like trying to chew food after receiving Novocaine from the dentist. I recall my mouth moving up and down, but there wasn't much chewing going on. I've never attempted to eat anything with the same texture as an orange before, and eventually the gag reflex kicked in and out came the orange. To me, that's not mental. I know how to chew. I placed the orange in my mouth expecting to chew it up and swallow it. That didn't happen. Something was confusing my ability to chew. One of the signs of sensory processing disorder is difficulty with motor skills. According to Sensory Processing Disorder's official website, children with sensory processing disorder often have problems with motor skills and other abilities needed for childhood accomplishments. As a result, they become socially isolated and suffer from low self-esteem and other social-emotional issues. These difficulties put children with SPD at high risk for many emotional and social problems, including the ability to be a part of a group, poor self-concept, and anxiety, depression, or other behavior problems can follow. Parents may be blamed for their children's behavior by people who are unaware of the child's hidden handicap. Does that sound familiar? I know to some of you it does. My parents were blamed for my diet, but they always knew that there was something else going on with me. I love the term hidden handicap because I do believe I have some sort of handicap that prevents me from tolerating foods normally. And the part about being socially isolated hits home with me too. I was never really socially isolated as a kid, but my socialization certainly had its limits, as I mentioned before with missing out on overnight camps as a child and things like that. So for me, sensory processing disorder is a closer diagnosis than a mental disorder. The mental side of it likely comes from all of the socialization disasters that I've had to endure over the 31 years of my life. But I also believe that this feeding disorder, if you will, is a spectrum, and there likely isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for all of us. Only time will reveal the answers for us, but luckily, we seem to be heading in the right direction. Being considered for the DSM-5 is a miracle, especially for someone who always thought she was alone. Eventually, they'll realize that they got it wrong, but in the meantime, at least it's been brought to the light so that they can get it right next time. Well, that concludes my first podcast regarding adult picky eating. I hope you enjoyed it. This podcast is a work in progress, and I hope to have some great stuff for you in the future, including topics on picky eating and dating, picky eating in the workplace, a special show for parents of picky eating children, live interviews, and more. In the meantime, feel free to check back often and please provide feedback. My website, pianapodcast.com, has a comment section on the bottom of the homepage, so please leave me something if you have anything to say. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk with you soon.